Imagine sitting down to work, and instead of your mind flitting between messages, tabs, and to-do lists, you feel a single beam of attention, sharp, steady, and effortless, directed at your task. That beam is not mystical, it's biological. It's the product of a few brain chemicals and circuits we can intentionally recruit in minutes. Today, I'll give you a short, repeatable protocol that reliably produces that beam, and I'll explain why it works. When we talk about fast state hacks for generating laser focus, we're really talking about tools that can quickly shift the brain from a scattered, low arousal mode into a narrow, high clarity state that supports deliberate work. These shifts aren't abstract ideas. They're rooted in how specific neuromodulators work and how the brain toggles between broad awareness and targeted attention. What most people misunderstand is that focus isn't something you wait for, it's something you create by influencing your internal state. And because the systems governing attention respond rapidly to certain signals, you can enter a productive state within minutes using simple physiological and behavioral techniques. The first lever is the autonomic nervous system, because the level of arousal your body is in dictates how well the prefrontal cortex can anchor attention. If arousal is too low, you feel foggy, unmotivated, or mentally sluggish. If it's too high, stress fragments your concentration and you can't hold a steady line of thinking. We're aiming for the middle zone, high enough to be alert, low enough to maintain deliberate control. A surprisingly effective way to get into this zone quickly is through controlled breathing. Slow inhalations increase sympathetic tone. Extended exhalations increase parasympathetic tone. By pacing your breath so the exhale is longer than the inhale, you nudge yourself into a calm but alert state that improves signal to noise in cognitive circuits. Even 2 minutes of this alters your internal landscape in meaningful ways. If you've ever felt like your mind snaps into clarity after a deep breath, that's the system adjusting. Another rapid lever is cold exposure, but it must be short and reasonable. A splash of cold water on the face or placing something cool on the back of the neck triggers a reflex that increases norepinephrine levels and boosts arousal without pushing you into anxiety. The increase in catecholamines creates a heightened readiness in the brain, and in that state, the circuits for selective attention operate more efficiently. You essentially narrow the sensory aperture. This is why sudden cold wakes you up more effectively than caffeine. And while you don't need full immersion or long durations, small cold exposures consistently create an immediate shift in cognitive sharpness that is noticeable within seconds. A third tool that works very quickly involves mild movement. Most people assume exercise only benefits long-term health or general energy, but short bouts of high-intensity movement, even 30 to 60 seconds, increase blood flow, oxygen, and neuromodulators associated with attention. This works not because you're burning energy, but because movement elevates key brain chemicals such as epinephrine and dopamine, which increase motivation and goal-directed behavior. After a brief burst of movement, the brain is more prepared to perform demanding cognitive tasks. Many people notice that right after climbing stairs quickly or doing a few air squats, the mind feels more online. That's not placebo, that's biology. Caffeine paired with L-theanine can also serve as a fast-acting focus tool when used intentionally. Caffeine increases dopamine and epinephrine to heighten alertness, while L-theanine smooths out the stimulation and improves sustained attention. This combination works especially well when you need several hours of clean focus without the jittery rise and crash effect caffeine alone can bring. But like any tool, it should be used with awareness, not as a dependency, but as a targeted enhancer when the task demands more depth. There is another fast state hack that's often overlooked: the single task initiation. The moment you pick a precise, defined action and begin it with no negotiation, the brain's executive network snaps into priority mode. Starting creates a cascade of clarity. This is because action generates dopamine, and dopamine increases the sense of readiness and reduces the friction around continuing. If you define the first step in concrete terms, write one sentence, read one page, open the project file, you create a small win that shifts your neurochemistry toward further engagement. The biggest problem for most people is not maintaining focus, it's entering it. A well-defined first step removes ambiguity, which is a major source of cognitive resistance. The most powerful fast state strategy is not a single hack, but the combination of 2 or 3 of them. For example, 2 minutes of controlled breathing, a splash of cold water, and 30 seconds of movement can shift your brain into a focused state more effectively than trying to force yourself to just concentrate. In under 5 minutes, you engage the physiology that supports narrowed attention, elevated motivation, and stable cognitive control. The shift feels like a tightening of the mind, not in a stressful way, but in a precise, steady way. And because these tools leverage biological mechanisms that respond instantly, they give you reliable access to focus whenever you need it. Attention is often described as a mental skill, but at its core, it is a biological process governed by neural circuits, chemical signals, and tightly coordinated interactions between different regions of the brain. When people say they can't focus, what they're really experiencing is a mismatch between the brain state required for deliberate attention and the state they're currently in. Understanding how attention actually works biologically gives you the ability to control it rather than treating it as something mysterious or unpredictable. And when you understand that attention is a physical phenomenon, not a purely mental one, the strategies to improve it become much more practical and reliable. The foundation of attention lies in the prefrontal cortex. This area behind your forehead is responsible for planning, decision making, impulse control, and directing mental resources. When you choose to focus on something, reading, studying, solving a problem, the prefrontal cortex sends signals to suppress irrelevant information coming from other parts of the brain. But it cannot do this effectively on its own. It relies on neuromodulators, chemicals that set the overall tone of neural activity to create a brain state where focus is possible. The two key neuromodulators involved in attention are dopamine and norepinephrine. Dopamine provides drive, motivation, and the feeling that something is meaningful. Norepinephrine increases alertness, readiness, and the ability to detect important information while suppressing noise. When these two chemicals are at the right levels and in the right balance, the brain becomes primed for deep, sustained attention. This balancing act is delicate. Too little norepinephrine and the brain feels drowsy, unfocused, and easily distracted. The world feels flat. Too much norepinephrine and the brain shifts into stress mode. Your thoughts scatter, you feel jittery, and your attention becomes fragmented. The ideal zone sits between these two extremes where alertness and calm coexist. That middle zone is where the prefrontal cortex performs at its highest level and where the brain can maintain a spotlight of attention on a single target. Another crucial player in attention is the anterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in monitoring errors and detecting conflict. It acts like a referee, constantly checking whether your attention is drifting off target and signaling the prefrontal cortex to pull it back. This is why focus is not a static state. It's a continuous process of losing and regaining attention. Even people with excellent focus experience micro lapses all the time. What differs is how quickly their brain pulls attention back to the task. The faster the correction, the more stable the overall focus feels. The parietal cortex also contributes by determining what you attend to. It's involved in spatial awareness and sensory integration, and it helps the brain decide which information among the millions of signals coming in should be prioritized. When you turn your eyes and focus on a specific object or listen carefully to one voice in a noisy room, the parietal cortex is coordinating that selection. It filters the sensory landscape so that your limited cognitive resources go towards something relevant. Without this filtering, attention becomes impossible. The brain would be overwhelmed by stimuli competing for dominance. Underlying all of this is one of the most important concepts in neuroscience. The brain has limited metabolic resources. Every moment of focus comes at an energy cost. The brain accounts for about 2% of body weight, but consumes around 20% of the body's energy. When you engage in deep focus, certain circuits are firing intensely while others are being suppressed. This selective activation requires fuel, oxygen, glucose, and stable blood flow. If the brain's internal or external environment disrupts these energy supplies, attention weakens. Fatigue, low blood sugar, dehydration, and poor sleep all degrade the brain's ability to maintain the elevated metabolic demands required for focus. This is why even the best cognitive techniques fail when the underlying biology is worn down. The biology of attention also explains why specific behaviors shift focus so quickly. Movement, for instance, increases blood flow and boosts the release of norepinephrine and dopamine. Light exposure early in the day helps set circadian rhythms, which regulate the baseline levels of alertness throughout the day. Even posture matters. Upright posture increases levels of norepinephrine and improves vigilance. These aren't psychological tricks. They are physiological interventions that change the neurochemical environment in which attention operates. What emerges from this biological understanding is a simple truth: attention is a trainable state. It's not random. It's not purely mental. It's the result of orchestrating the right neurochemical levels, activating the right neural circuits, and maintaining the metabolic resources those circuits require. When you learn how these systems work and how to influence them, you gain the ability to direct your mind with precision. You stop relying on motivation and start relying on biology, because biology is consistent, available, and trainable. A practical protocol for generating deep focus has to be simple enough to use every day, but powerful enough to shift your brain state reliably. The goal is not to create an elaborate ritual, it's to give your nervous system the exact signals it needs to transition into a mode of heightened, narrow attention. The real power of a protocol lies in its consistency and its ability to recruit multiple biological levers at once. When you combine breathing, sensory input, physiology, and behavioral structure, you create a state where the brain naturally aligns toward a single objective. That is the essence of effective focus. The first step is to establish clarity. The brain is highly sensitive to ambiguity, and uncertainty consumes cognitive resources. Before doing anything else, define the task you're going to work on and the one specific outcome you want from the session. Not a vague intention like work on the project, but something measurable and observable, such as outline the first 3 sections or write 300 words. This isn't just good planning. It activates goal-oriented circuitry in the prefrontal cortex and orients your attention toward a target. The clearer the target, the easier it is for your brain to suppress irrelevant pathways. Once you have defined the outcome, shift your physiology. Within the first 2 minutes, use controlled breathing to set your autonomic state. A simple ratio, inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 6, moves the nervous system toward calm alertness. This extended exhale increases parasympathetic activity just enough to stabilize your internal state without lowering your arousal too far. What you're doing here is preparing the environment in which focus will operate. If your internal state is chaotic, your attention will be too. A short breathing session acts as a reset button. After breathing, add a quick arousal boost. Cold exposure is one of the fastest ways to increase noradrenergic activity safely. You don't need full immersion. A splash of cold water on your face, a brief cold shower blast, or holding a cold compress to the back of your neck for 30 seconds is enough. This creates a spike in alertness without pushing you into overstimulation. It sharpens your attention system by increasing signal to noise in neural circuits. People often underestimate how rapidly cold can shift mental clarity, but the effect is both immediate and reliable. Next, you want to engage the body. Even a short burst of movement, 30 to 60 seconds of fast-paced exercise, dramatically increases cerebral blood flow, elevates dopamine, and raises epinephrine. This primes the brain for cognitive effort. Movement is a biological switch that tells your system, we need to be ready. The mind follows the state of the body, so moving the body first sets the stage for directed mental work. Many people try to focus without preparing their physiology, and that's why they struggle. Bringing the body into a ready state makes the shift into deep attention feel more natural. At this point, you've set your internal chemistry and physiology. The next step is behavioral structure, because attention is inherently limited in duration. Instead of trying to force yourself into long, uninterrupted work, use a timed block. 20 to 25 minutes is ideal for most people because it aligns well with natural ultradian rhythms and the brain's ability to sustain effort before drifting. Set a timer. Commit fully for that block. The timer acts as a contract between you and your attention system. It activates the brain's salience networks, signaling that the upcoming period has boundaries and value. As soon as the timer starts, isolate your environment. Close all unnecessary tabs. Silence notifications. Place your phone physically out of reach. The brain cannot truly multitask, and every switch incurs a metabolic cost. You want to remove opportunities for the brain to divert attention because attention follows salience, and digital distractions are engineered to hijack salience. By eliminating them, you make the brain's job easier. There is only one place to direct energy. When you begin working, start with the simplest action related to your defined goal. The first micro action is crucial. It creates momentum and releases dopamine, which further anchors you into the task. This small initial success increases your motivation to continue. From there, the flow of focus becomes smoother because you've activated the reward systems associated with progress. When the timer finishes, take a short break, just enough to reset your neural circuits. Stand up, stretch, look at a distant object to relax the visual system and reset your breathing. If needed, run the protocol again or continue with subsequent timed blocks. A practical focus protocol works because it aligns physiology, neuromodulation, and behavior. It's not about willpower. It's about creating the conditions where focus emerges naturally. When you consistently follow each step, you build a reliable pathway into deep, high-quality attention, and over time, that becomes your default mode for serious work. Sustainable focus is not built on dramatic hacks or heroic bursts of effort. It's built on consistent behaviors that support the biology of attention day after day. Quick tools can help you enter focus rapidly, but the ability to return to that state repeatedly depends on how you treat your nervous system across the entire day. The brain is remarkably adaptive, yet it also has limits. It needs rhythms, recovery, and balanced stimulation to function at its highest level. When you respect these constraints, you create a foundation where focus becomes far easier and more stable. The real goal is not to manufacture a single session of deep attention. The real goal is to create a lifestyle that naturally produces it. One of the most important factors in sustained focus is sleep. The architecture of sleep directly affects attention circuits, memory consolidation, and the neurochemical systems that govern alertness. When sleep is poor or inconsistent, the prefrontal cortex struggles to maintain control over impulsive or distracting signals. Neuromodulators like dopamine and norepinephrine become dysregulated. Even the best tools for focus lose much of their power when the underlying sleep foundation is compromised. Regular sleep, wake timing, is one of the simplest but most effective ways to maintain the integrity of attention systems. Going to bed and waking up at the same time anchors circadian rhythms, which in turn stabilize energy, mood, and cognitive performance throughout the day. Light exposure is another pillar. Morning light creates a strong biological signal that sets the circadian clock and determines when your brain will release key hormones and neuromodulators later in the day. Getting sunlight or bright outdoor light within the first hour of waking improves alertness, increases dopamine pathways involved in motivation, and helps solidify nighttime sleep quality. This is not just an environmental preference, it's a direct biological input. Without appropriate light cues, the circadian system drifts and attention becomes inconsistent, wavering between periods of fog and overstimulation. Nutrition also plays a significant role in sustaining focus. The brain operates on a continuous supply of glucose, oxygen, and micronutrients. Large fluctuations in blood sugar, long periods of dehydration, or nutrient deficiencies can undermine the brain's capacity to maintain effortful cognitive tasks. Eating balanced meals with adequate protein, healthy fats, and complex carbohydrates provides the slow, steady energy that supports extended periods of cognitive output. Hydration is equally critical. Even slight dehydration, levels people often don't notice, can impair concentration, reaction time, and working memory. Maintaining stable internal resources frees the brain from having to constantly adjust to energy shortages. Equally important is the management of daily stress. Short-term stress can sharpen focus, but chronic or unregulated stress disrupts attention networks, increases distractibility, and makes it harder to enter calm, controlled states of concentration. Incorporating brief stress, regulating behaviors, controlled breathing, a short walk, taking a moment to switch visual focus from near to far, acts as a pressure valve for the nervous system. These small practices reduce baseline anxiety and improve flexibility in attention switching. Over time, the brain becomes better at moving between high-intensity work and restorative recovery. Another key aspect of sustainable focus is knowing how to cycle effort. The brain naturally operates in ultradian cycles, typically lasting 90 to 120 minutes. During these cycles, attention rises, peaks, and declines. When you push past the decline point without rest, performance drops sharply and mental fatigue accumulates. Respecting these rhythms, working intensely for a set block, then taking a short, deliberate break, reinforces the brain's capacity to sustain high-quality attention. Rest is not the opposite of productivity, it is part of the biological strategy that maintains it. Safety should be considered throughout all these protocols. Tools like cold exposure, breath work, or caffeine supplements have real physiological effects. While they are generally safe for most people, they may not be suitable for everyone. Individuals with cardiovascular or respiratory conditions, or those sensitive to stimulants, should approach these tools cautiously and ideally consult a medical professional before incorporating them. Pushing these tools too intensely or too frequently can cause more strain than benefit. Cold exposure should always be brief and controlled. Breathwork should never be done while driving or in risky environments. Stimulants should be used with awareness of dose and timing and avoided too late in the day to protect sleep. The most sustainable path to long-term focus is one that respects biology instead of overriding it. You create the conditions for consistent attention, not by forcing your brain into submission, but by aligning with its natural rhythms and supporting the systems that underpin cognitive performance. When you combine deliberate daily habits, sleep, light movement, nutrition, stress regulation with strategic focus tools, you build a nervous system that can access deep attention reliably. Sustainability comes from balance and understanding, not intensity. And safety ensures that the practices you rely on today remain beneficial for the long term. Thank you for watching BRAND Coded. If this helped you, subscribe and share one success you had using the protocol. Own your attention. It's the most valuable tool you'll ever train.